Hey guys, this is Rick and welcome to Walk and Talk number 8, I believe this is. I thought in this one I would talk about myself a little bit. Maybe, just so you get to know me a little bit better. I know I've always kind of been interested in, the people that I subscribe to as far as who they are as people. So I'll talk a little bit about myself. I've had a pretty interesting life, actually. It's been unusual, let me say that. I think it's probably more unusual than the standard life that you hear people talk about. Not necessarily in a good way, but definitely a different. It's given me a lot of life experiences, and it's given me sort of a different perspective on life that I think a lot of people have. Mainly because I grew up. Oh, this is a pretty area here. Look at this. This is really nice. I like this. Boy, you could build a house right here. Set up a little fishing shack. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? But anyways, getting back to what I was saying there. I get so easily distracted. I grew up very poor, and people have different definitions on what poor is. It's it's it just depends on what your situation, what you consider to be poor. But my definition of poor, or my life, has really, I don't know if that I really have a definition of poor per se, but I know that my life, my childhood, we were poor to the extent that we were homeless for a number of times. I won't say quite a few, but I know of at least 6 times that I can remember that we were homeless and living, hand to mouth, basically. I've lived in some very, let's call them, interesting places. I've lived in a big old house, really a house that dated back to the 1800s. It was a huge house, had all these rooms in it. It was crazy. It's kind of one of those kind of crazy houses that you see on like these horror movies, where where the family moves into it, and then come to find out it's on a Indian burial ground or some crazy stuff like that. So big old, with 20 bedrooms in it, crazy big old house, that way out in the country. And that's when I lived in Alabama, because we moved out there for a time. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've lived in, basically a county park. When we moved up to Oregon, we lived in a county park for the whole first summer and part of the school year there. In fact, I kind of got into school late that year because we were just living out in the. It was out in the woods, literally out in the woods. There was no. The nearest town was probably a good 50 miles from where we were living, and we were just living out in the woods. So I've done the whole gamut, and there's been times when I just didn't. We just didn't have any place to live. Period. We're living on the side of the road or living out of the car, and it was. The reason for that was we moved around a lot, and there was no, it wasn't like we were in a military family or anything. That wasn't the case. It was just the plain fact that my mom moved around a lot. We would, dang. Oh, I'm in creative mode. That's why. I was wondering what was going on there. Oh, it was freaking me out. My mom was just the type of person that we'd be living in a place for maybe a year or so, and then out of the clear blue sky, she would just come along and pack us up and move us to whatever, and then of course, no job, no prospects, and we'd be living hand to mouth for a while. Really, to be honest, you think to yourself, well, what in the world? I mean, unless there's a reason for moving, why would you move that much? And unfortunately, there was a reason. And the reason was that my mom was, and I didn't realize this until much later in life when I finally started, when I had some perspective. I'd been away from, I moved out of my house. I moved out in my senior year of high school. I moved in with a friend of the family because I just couldn't take it anymore. It was just getting to be so, and I wanted to finish. My mom was getting to that point where she was, you know, getting increasingly anxious and wanted to move, and I was still in high school. And I said, no, I want to finish out high school. We had lived, that was in Oregon. We had lived there since I was in junior high, and I wanted to finish out high school. So I just moved out, and I moved out, been on my own ever since. But it wasn't until much later in life that I realized, when I went back and had some time to myself and had some perspective and got a little older and started piecing things together. When you get older, you start understanding things that you don't understand as a kid. As a kid, something's not the way it ought to be. But you can't quite, we're getting some lag here. Must be generating some new chunks. They're not right, but you don't know why they're not right. But it wasn't until much later, and I went back to visit my mom and stuff, that I realized that she was mentally unstable, and she had been really my whole life. She was married 6 times, and the guys that she was married to were all pretty much as messed up as she was. But again, as a kid, you can't really say, okay, this is what the reason is. As a kid, you say, well, this isn't right. This isn't how other people are living their lives. But you don't know you can't, sometimes it's hard to determine what the situation was. But she was mentally unstable, and unfortunately, I've since come to find out that that sort of instability kind of runs on her side of the family. Now, my dad, they divorced. My mom and my father divorced when I was 5 years old, and I never saw him. I don't know anything about him nor his family. They never contacted me, never wanted to talk to me. So I have absolutely no idea who they were or what they were. I just have very vague recollections of a couple Christmases back then, but I don't really remember anything about him. I've seen pictures, obviously, and I look a little bit like him, but strangely enough, I actually am sort of a spitting image of my grandfather on my mother's side. But he was kind of, from what I understand, he died when I was, all my family has pretty much died off. Both my grandparents on my mom's side have died off. My mom died of cancer here a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. Oh, are we at the end of the line here? Wow. Let's see if we can find some new continents here. Yeah, she passed away from cancer. So I have some siblings, but unfortunately, that sort of crazy childhood, that sort of crazy life, it does 2 things to you. It either breaks you down or it toughens you up. Unfortunately, my siblings, it pretty much broke down, and the result was typically what you would expect the result to be: getting in trouble all the time, in and out of jail, on drugs, that whole 9 yards. Me, on the other hand, it did just the opposite effect. Probably because I'm more like my grandfather than the rest of my siblings. Like I said, I'm a spitting image of my grandfather, and he was a tough son of a gun. And it toughened me up. It made me a tough son of a gun as well. And I'm still that way. Extremely tough, extremely stubborn. I'm like one of those bulldogs that when they clamp down on something, they don't let go. That's me. But on the other hand, it didn't make me a bad kid. I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't get into fights. And, strangely enough, bullying's kind of the issue now in schools. I never had that problem. I was never bullied. I guess maybe because of where we lived. We were literally I was literally the kid across the tracks, living in the bad part of town. But I never had any problem with anybody. Nobody wanted to mess with me, And I don't know, I just never had the problem of bullying. People just, for some reason, they just didn't mess with me. I don't know why. And I've always been tried to be a good person, regardless of the circumstances. And even when I was a kid, I wanted to think more of other people than I wanted to think of myself. I don't know why that is. That's just my personality. But it did make me tough. And believe me, if I set my mind to something, I usually get it, one way or another. It just made me stubborn. I got straight A's in school, which was counterintuitive. You think, oh, someone from that socioeconomic level isn't going to do good in school, Well, I did extremely well in school, both in school and then when I graduated school. I couldn't afford to go to a regular university. Back then, this was back I graduated high school in 76, so that tells you how old I am. Just do the math. Back then, there weren't a lot of grants and stuff. It was a different time, and it was a lot more difficult to do things, and I couldn't really afford to go to a university, so I went to a trade school. I went to DeVry, and even in DeVry, I got straight A's and didn't really study that much. I've always been able to apply myself and figure things out. I've been, someone called me a crafty individual. What they meant was, oh, there's ice. Oh, we're getting to ice biome? Yeah, it looks like it. Called me a crafty individual. What he meant by that was, in fact, it was one of my teachers. What he meant by that was the fact that, you give me a book and you give me some time and I'll figure out how to do it. That's actually how I learned how to program, because back when I went to trade school, they had computers, but they were the size of, houses. And there wasn't any sort of IT, quote unquote, IT curriculum. I learned how to program, but it wasn't, there wasn't like you could get a job as a programmer back then. You just couldn't do it. There was no such thing. The people that programmed computers back then were mathematicians and engineers and people at universities and banks and that kind of stuff, and they weren't like programmers. They were like engineers and electrical engineers, and I mean there was no programming stuff. But that's something I wanted to do, especially as the PC business end of it started to grow, PCs, and people started using them in business. After the 8-bit computers, the Commodores and stuff, the PC came out, the IBM PC, and people started actually using these things in offices. It wasn't just big mainframes. They were actually using them, with spreadsheets and stuff like that. And I thought, that's what I want to do, because seems like a real interesting work. And I happened to be working in a Babbage's software store, as I was the store manager. And back then you could open up a package and use it and then repackage everything and shrink wrap it and sell it. You can't do that nowadays, but back then you could do that because the packaging was like, it wasn't like it is today. The discs were like in little envelopes. You could just take them out, and we had a shrink wrap machine back there. So I learned how to program when I worked at Babbage's, and I actually ended up getting a job as a programmer, and I was a programmer for 15 or 20 years, and I was a darn good programmer too, but I just taught myself how to do it. So, I have a hard time with people that say they can't, that life is holding them back. Believe me, the life that I've lived, and I'll talk about it some more in probably some future episodes. The life that I've lived, though, has been a tough one. To be honest, a tough one. We've moved around a lot for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And, there wasn't any reason for all of the difficulties that we lived in. It was just the fact that my mother was a crazy person. Let's be honest. She was mentally unstable. So, that's what I contended with as a child. But, I just decided that's not going to define who I am. That life that I lived, I had no choice. I was a kid. I had to follow the dictates of my parents or my mother. But you know what? When I reached high school and when I reached senior year, that's why I left, because I decided that's not going to dictate who I am in life. And it hasn't. That past has not dictated who I've been in life. But it has given me a perspective that a lot of people don't have. And and it's given me some life lessons as well. So, you know, regardless, I think, of your situation, and you know, there's hundreds and thousands and millions of different situations, but you know what, you got to, you shouldn't settle. You shouldn't settle for being poor or whatever, you know. For that, being poor isn't the big deal. Having money is not a big deal to me. Believe me, I've had money and I've not had money. When I was a programmer, I had plenty of money. And now I don't have much money. And before I was a programmer, I didn't have much money. Money doesn't create happiness, regardless of what people say. You know, none of that stuff is really defines you as an individual. It's what's in your heart that defines you as an individual. And I just decided that my past, as rough as it was and as crazy as it was sometimes, that wasn't going to define me as an individual, and it hasn't. And I've kind of made my own way in life, regardless of the obstacles that are in front of me. So anyways, just a little bit about me. Well, I'll talk about more. I've got a lot of interesting little stories I can talk about, like the time we moved back to Alabama, and me and a friend, we moved to Alabama, and me and a friend of mine, we kept smelling something in the woods, and we lived out in the country, and we followed the trail to looking for a moonshiner. So that was kind of fun. We didn't find the whiskey steel, but we did have an adventure. So we'll talk about that and some other things as well. Some crazy stuff in my life. It's been definitely interesting. Well, it's nighttime. We've reached the end of the line for this episode. Looks like we're in a ice biome of some sort. What is it? Where's all this stuff? Ice mountains. Okay, so we're in an ice mountain. So this is where we'll pick up next time. I appreciate you watching, and I will talk to you again next time. Goodbye.